Very good morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. So this morning we will look into this topic called the 5 spiritual faculties. I think the subtitle is Applications in Daily Life. I think Bob's asked me to speak on this topic. I think like everything that we study in the Dharma, in the teachings of the Buddha, obviously it has got its applications in our everyday life. Okay, because if we only study the Dhamma, it's only once a week, we come to the temple, we learn to recite, we learn to chant, but or we understand some very abstract teachings, and then we find that we're not able to apply it in our everyday life, then that's not very beneficial, right? So the whole essence of the Buddha's teachings is how can we actually apply what we have learned. Okay, even the chanting, even the meditation, even the scripture study that we have. So I think very important that whatever we have studied, we must be able to apply in the everyday life. So today we have got this topic called the 5 spiritual faculties. Obviously the Buddha was a spiritual teacher, a religious teacher. So in his 45 years teaching, right? He has given a lot of instructions, a lot of advice, which we can relate and how we want to practice spiritually. But especially we are lay people, we are not monks, we are not nuns, so there's also one aspect of our life where we need to be responsible for maybe our career, our family, our children, our spouse, and so on. So how do we then apply the Buddha's teaching? So this is one example here. Okay, now, like everything else that we study, it's very important to know where it comes from, isn't it? I think that's very important, right? So that we know it's the real teachings of the Buddha. So, for example, the 5 spiritual faculties, I think most of you, or in fact all of you, are more familiar with the Pali tradition, right? The Theravada tradition. So in the Theravada tradition, or in the Pali tradition, there's a whole section in our scriptures called the Samyutta Indriya, right, which is in the book of connected discourses. Our Buddhist teachings, they are actually all found in 5 important texts, right, or 5 important scriptures. So the teachings on the 5 spiritual faculties, there's a whole section called the Samyutta Indriya. So this is what Indriya actually means, faculties. So you look at that section 48, right? The whole, I think there are easily 20 over suttas. All right, so then that's the teachings of the Buddha. So you're listening to something that comes directly from the Buddha, right? It's from the scriptures, okay? And you know which part of it. So it's very important for us to, when we study the teachings, to know where did we get this, all right? Is this 5 spiritual faculties something that Babs just came up with and asked me to speak on, right? Has it got its basis in the Buddha's teachings? I think that's very important, yeah? So I just repeat, so because in today's session, maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes, there is so much that you can grasp. What is important is after today's session, I hope you could go back, look at the Samyutta Indriya, that section on the 5 faculties, because all the details are actually there, okay? Now, again, some of you may be familiar with the Abhidhamma, which is the third book in our Buddhist scriptures. In the Abhidhamma, for example, we talk about the mental factors, right, the Cetasikas, and within the 52 mental factors, or 51, depending on which tradition you want to follow. So let's say 52 mental factors. Of the 52, there are 25 what is called beautiful mental factors. Sobanas, the sobanas, the beautiful mental factors. And from the 25, the first one is the first of the 5 spiritual faculties, which is faith. Faith, all right? Saddha. And the 25th one is actually wisdom. All right? So from here, you also know that it's not only in the suttas itself that the 5 spiritual faculties are very important, but even in the Abhidhamma, right, which is the third book in the Buddhist canon, right? And it's a mental factor. In other words, faith or mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, they are mental factors that accompanies each consciousness that arises. Okay, so they are very important, and they are beautiful mental factors. So they have used the word beautiful because they are wholesome, they are positive, right? So it is important why we did develop that. So actually, if you look at the 52 mental factors, 25 of them are actually beautiful ones. So there are a lot of good mental factors we can cultivate, we can develop, right? So that gives us a lot of faith, or confidence in the Buddha, what the Buddha has taught. Okay, so the 5 spiritual faculties are basically, you summarize it, faith, all right? And then we talk about effort or energy, then we talk about mindfulness, then we talk about concentration, and then we talk about wisdom. Okay, now it's quite a big task to try to talk about 5 spiritual faculties in maybe 40 minutes, all right? So what I'll do is just to give a very quick summary, maybe just like before your main course is just the appetizer, all right? So you will not be able to get really much from today's talk other than the fact that you know what are these 5 spiritual faculties. But more important is how does these 5 spiritual faculties work, all right? I think then subsequently is for you to go back and then put it into practice in your everyday life. Okay, so we will also see, maybe hopefully at the end of today's session, that these 5 faculties or 5 spiritual faculties, you can cultivate them not only in your meditation, not only in your, in your spiritual pursuit, but also in your everyday life, right? In your everyday life. So before I show you some slides which I've compiled, so I thought to give you a good indication. Because the subtitle is Applications in Daily Life, right? Or you can say Worldly Life, okay? Now, there's a very famous quote from a 13th century Zen Buddhist monk, a Japanese Zen monk. His name is Dogen. And Dogen founded a school of Zen Buddhism called Soto Zen, right? Now, this very famous quote from Dogen says that those who see obstacles in Dhamma, those who see obstacles in worldly life, those who see obstacles in worldly life, sees no Dhamma in everyday actions. This is what Dogen says. Yeah? Those who see obstacles in worldly life, right, sees no Dhamma in everyday actions. Why? Because they have not realized there is no everyday actions outside of Dhamma. So every action that we do actually can be manifested as Dharma. Dharma means, based on the teachings of the Buddha. So I think that's a very powerful phrase from Dogen, which essentially tells us that if we think that Dharma practice is only restricted or limited to once a week on Sunday, or when you go on your retreats, or when an achan comes and give you a meditation session, then I think you're missing the point. Then you're really missing the point. The point here is that there is no obstacles to everyday action, because everyday or to worldly actions, because worldly actions can be based on Dharma. How do we transform our everyday actions into Dharma? All right? Okay, so let's look at some of these slides here, and hopefully at the end of it you will realize that actually these 5 spiritual faculties, and in the text it also says from the faculties it becomes powers. So the Pali word is indriyas, right? Just like I mentioned the word sangyutta, indriya. So from indriyas, it actually becomes bala. Bala means powers. So how is it that we are able to transform these mental qualities that we have innate in us into a power that can drive us both spiritually as well as in our everyday life. Okay, so I'll show you some slides, and then maybe I'll end 10, 15, right? About 40 minutes. Okay. Okay. So first of all, as you all know, in the Buddha's teachings, everything is about the mind, isn't it? Right? Okay. It's inside here. Okay. That is why in the Dhammapada, it says, the first verse of the Dhammapada says, mind is a forerunner of all things. So the mind, when left to itself without any guidance, is an easy prey to defilements that swell up from within itself, therefore preventing us from attaining our highest welfare and genuine good. Okay? Now, in one of the very famous Buddhist teachings, in the book of Gradual Sayings, Anguttara Nikaya, I think the first book, all right, it says that actually our mind is luminous. Our mind is actually luminous, but it becomes it becomes dark, it becomes defiled because of adventitious, because of defilements. Right? So in other words, we can purify our mind. And how do we do that? It is the faculties that serve as agents of inward control that transforms our mind from defilements to wholesomeness. That is why in Buddhist practice, we always talk about transforming the mind, isn't it? The thing is transforming the mind. Not so much controlling the mind, but transform all the negative defilements that we have into something positive. Right? Now, how do we do that? So meditation, for example, is one example. Mindfulness, right? Developing loving kindness, all right? And then if the 4 right efforts, which we will come and talk about. So that's the first one. So this is what indriya, right? Because the 5 faculties. So the faculties, it comes from the Pali word indriya. What is this indriya? Indriya is come from the ancient Vedic god Indra. Right? This is in Indian mythology, right? If you look at Indian mythology, sometimes the scriptures, you find this word Indra. The Indras are lightning bolt, right? Indra. Now, who is this Indra? Indra later in Buddhist text became Saka. Right? And the Chinese call him Tikong. Right? So that's the mythology part of it. Right? So it traces back to the Buddha's time. You have Indra, then Indra became Saka, and Hokkiens call him Tikong. Right? So this is Indra. But what is the quality of Indra? Well, whether you believe in that, it doesn't matter. That's not important. Right? Important thing is Indra has got this special quality of control and domination, because he's a powerful god. So as a powerful God, he can control and he can dominate. So this mind of ours, the 5 faculties, does exercise control over a specific defilement to marshal the potency of our mind towards a breakthrough to final awakening. So it is said that for us to be able to attain liberation, so we need the breakthrough. Then how do we do that? So we make use of these 5 spiritual faculties, 5 faculties. So just as Indra vanquished the demons and attained supremacy among the gods. So Indian mythology, right? So you have a little of Indian mythology of this great god Indra. So Indra, so from the word Indra, you got Indriya, the faculty. So these are very powerful mental qualities which we can cultivate. So I think I mentioned to you, what are these 5 spiritual faculties? Well, probably you would have heard them. The first one is confidence. I've used the word confidence, but sometimes it's translated as faith. So the Pali word, if you are familiar with Pali, Pali is the language of the scriptures used in the Theravada tradition. So the word is saddha. Now, what does the word saddha mean? Saddha means actually to place the heart onto something. Right? There's a literal, the etymology of that word, saddha. Or in Sanskrit, sraddha. Right? If you are familiar with Chinese Buddhism, then the Sanskrit, they use the Sanskrit version, which is sraddha. But in Pali, it's saddha. So saddha is translated as faith, or translated as trust, or as confidence. Okay? So, of course, here, as Buddhists, we have faith in the Buddha's enlightenment, Buddha's awakening. Because if you don't have that faith, you will not even be sitting here this morning, isn't it? The very fact that all of us are sitting here, or all of you are sitting here this morning, is because you have an element of faith that you choose on your own free will. I don't think anybody forced you to come. Right? Maybe your children were forced to come to Sunday school, but I don't know. Maybe some of you were forced to come because if you don't come here, then your children cannot go to Sunday school. That is not on your own free will. But I would imagine all of you come here willingly, and that's because there's this faith. There's that faith in you. Okay. Nagarjuna, some of you know Nagarjuna, the great Indian Pandit who is credited as the founder of the Mahayana Buddhism. Nagarjuna said that it is through faith that we enter the path, and it is from wisdom that we exit. So if you don't have faith, you can't even enter the spiritual path. Right? If you look at our life itself, our everyday life, for you to be successful in any business, any venture, anything you want to do, you don't have the confidence. Right? That is why in management we always say you must have self-confidence, isn't it? If you don't have self-confidence, you are not going to be successful, all right? So when, maybe if you're a general manager of a company or you're a head of department, you want to interview an employee, everything is the same. He has got qualifications, he has got experience. So what you look for is whether that person you talk to during the interview, does he instill in you some kind of self-confidence? But if during the interview the guy doesn't even show any confidence at all, so you get a bit worried, isn't it? Because you're not sure when he comes on board, And so confidence is very important, even in our mundane everyday life. Okay? So we just bear that in mind. So in Buddhism, when we talk about confidence or saddha, all right? Now, I think of faith, all right? I think in most religions, faith is the cornerstone of one's belief, isn't it? All right? When I first came into Buddhism many, many years ago, all right, it was through Theravada Buddhism, and I always thought, faith is only found in people who are not so educated, who have nothing better to do but just chant Namo Amitofo, and who only do devotion, who goes to the temple, light joss sticks and candles. So I always had that impression that faith is for the weakling, But later, as I understand more about the Dharma, then I realized that faith is a very important part in the Buddha's teachings. And then when I studied the canon, the Pali canon, as I mentioned early on, in the Samyutta, in Indriya, the Buddha gave the whole section, more than 20 discourses, emphasizing the importance of faith. And later when you study the Abhidhamma, you find that from the 25 beautiful mental factors, the first one is faith. Sobbana citta, all right? The first one is faith. So in other words, the Buddha actually emphasized the importance of faith. Now, what is the difference then? What type of faith are we talking about here? Now, faith is not an end in itself. Just as all of you know that meditation is not an end in itself. Meditation is a tool, isn't it? Your mindfulness is a tool. It's not an end in itself. It's a tool. Likewise, faith is not an end. It's a tool. All right? So faith, the Buddha makes a distinction between two types of faith. Right? One type of faith is very shallow. Very, very shallow. And he says that this is type of faith that has got no roots, no akar. You don't have strong roots like your tauge. You can easily pull it out. Right? So many people who say they are Buddhists, but their faith is actually very, very shallow, very, very weak. All right? The moment a problem arises, there's no more Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. They will go everywhere, for all sorts of cure, all sorts of magic, and things like that. So that kind of faith is very, very shallow. All right? The Buddha called it faith without roots. Amulika sada. Amulika, that means mula is roots. So amuli, that means no roots. Okay? So the Buddha says the other type of faith which we should cultivate is what is called faith with roots, or strong faith. Faith which is deepened in understanding. Akaravati. The word the Buddha used in the text is akaravati sada. So you could Google what's the difference between these two types of faith. In akaravati sada, or this type of faith, which is strong faith, your faith arises, deepens, gets stronger because of understanding, because of wisdom. You see the difference? So here we're not talking about blind faith. Right? We're not talking about faith which is shallow. Now, like all Buddhist teachings, right, you learn about the 4 Brahma Viharas, you learn about loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Each one of it, though wonderful, it has got what is called its near enemy. You know the word near enemy? In other words, you are not careful, your love may turn to compassion, may turn to attachment. So that's called the near enemy. So likewise, faith, if you don't develop faith too much, then your faith can actually lead to dogmatism. Dogmatism, it means that you actually becomes very rigid in your views. All right. So I'm sure you may even have met someone who may even be Buddhist, right, who are very fanatical. Fanatical in the sense that, only my method of meditation is correct. Your method is wrong. Or only my teacher teach us the right form of meditation. Your teacher is not the right meditation teacher. I'm not sure you have come across that. If you have not, sadhu to you. Wonderful. But I have many times. And I have to say, I say, why do you say that? Have you practiced in that teacher's meditation method? No, I have not. But I know mine is the best. So because of that strong faith in that teacher, that strong faith in that teaching. And you have seen how a wrong understanding or wrong grasp of faith can actually lead you to even do something that even goes against your precepts, against harming other people, killing other people, right? And that's what happens when fanaticism arises. Okay, so likewise, in our everyday life, right, we got to be very, very careful about that. Okay, so how do we balance faith? So in the 5 spiritual faculties, I told you about faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom. Now, you can interpret it as a kind of a gradual develop. So once with faith, then you can cultivate the effort. Then with effort, you cultivate mindfulness, concentration, finally you get wisdom. So that's one way of looking at it. Now, the other way is looking as a form of a pair, right? Later I'll come to it. So I will just run through this. So then we talk about as a, in our everyday life, right? So our state of mind has much to do with our success, isn't it? Right? As I said just now, faith, we have confidence. So our thoughts affect our behavior, which affects our results. So to be successful, we need to become aware of our thoughts, right? That's why today you find that especially mindfulness, all right, is no longer only taught in temples. Mindfulness is taught even in corporate institutions, all right? For example, McKinsey, McKinsey, I know of someone who's a consultant in McKinsey who actually uses mindfulness to train business people so that they are more focused in their work. Right? I think a couple of years back, I actually interviewed him for Eastern Horizon, and he said that, well, he is an Indian guy. In America, there are a lot of Indians, right? He got a vice president. Maybe the next president also could be an Indian, right? So a lot of Indians. So this young Indian gentleman, right? He's a successful corporate leader, and he works for McKinsey, and he teaches mindfulness to his corporate, right, environment. Okay, so we'll go into details. So the 5 faculties can be a framework for success in anything we do. It is a clear summary of understanding how the mind works by offering a helpful way for us to make adjustments to practice in real time. Now, you can see it in this summarized, like confidence in higher values, vigorous effort towards the good, attentive awareness, focused concentration, and intelligent understanding. So from the spiritual side, all right, you look at the 5 spiritual faculties, you talk about confidence in their faith in higher values. All right, you also have faith in the Buddha's teachings, isn't it? You have faith in the Buddha, you have faith in his teachings, and you have faith in the Sangha. Now, what do you mean by having faith in the Buddha's teachings? The most important aspects of the Buddha's teachings, of course, there are many important aspects, but one very important aspect is the law of karma. In other words, you understand that every action has consequences. Right? So that's a summary of what karma is all about. So if you understand the Buddha's teachings, you have faith in the Buddha's teachings, then whatever you do will be guided by certain values, certain value system. And this value system will be again guided by your understanding of karma, which says that every action that you do, that you say, that you think will have consequences. All right? Remember, karma manifests through the mind door, the speech door, and the body door. Right? Karma manifests in 3 doors. So every action through body, speech, and mind will have consequences. So that's a value system. So if you have that value system, then you have confidence that I will only do something that is wholesome. I will not do anything that is unwholesome. You follow that? So that is that faith, that is that understanding. Now, to have that, you need effort, isn't it? You must have effort. No point just having faith. Oh, I have faith in the Buddha, then that's not good enough. You must have effort. Okay? So we look at effort. So, while faith provides the inspiration and aspiration that steers the mind away from doubt to build a confidence that we can achieve our goals, energy or virya kindles the fire of sustained endeavor that burns out obstructions and brings us to maturity in factors that help us achieve success in whatever we do. All right? If you have self-confidence, say you apply for a new job, you've taken a higher position, as a general manager of a new department, all right, you start work, but what will determine your success is the effort and the hard work that you put in, right? Not the string of qualifications. The string of qualifications or experience may get you the job, but how you succeed in your job depends on what kind of effort that you put in. Okay, and that effort, of course, will be based on your confidence. Now, just now we said that based on confidence in wholesome values. Even in a corporate environment, today we talk about we talk about corporate values too, isn't it? We talk about honesty, we talk about trust. For example, if you're an accountant and then you go in, first thing you do is creative accounting. Then there's going to be a problem, right? So you may end up like one section of PwC in Australia recently, right? So that's not something you want to do, okay? So this word virya, right? Now this word virya actually comes from, or rather the Malay word actually is derived from this word virya. You know the Malay word vira? Vira, what does vira mean? A hero, isn't it? Like proton vira, vira, right? It means a hero. So it's a Sanskrit word, it's a Pali word. So from the word vira, you got virya. So sometimes the word virya is translated as heroic effort. The effort of a hero. And who is this hero here? Indra, for example. The all-powerful God, you see? So there is a lot of, you can see that the connection there. So you can use it as in that sense. So mindfulness contribute clear awareness, the antidote to carelessness and the prejudice. So you have self-confidence now, and then you have got you have got effort. You put in the effort, but how you execute either your meditation or how you execute your everyday life depends a lot on how mindful you are in your work. All right. In fact, I first heard of this word mindfulness maybe about 25 years ago when the CEO of my company at that time, he was telling all the bankers, he said, all of us, we must be mindful of what we do. The loans that we give, we must have, the credit evaluation, you must all be very mindful. So that was the first time I heard the word mindfulness being used. All right, and I wasn't sure whether he has learned any mindfulness meditation. Obviously, he hasn't, even though I know subsequently that his wife was very active at the Kuan Yin temple. Right? So, but mindfulness, 25 years ago, it was word used. Right? So mindfulness means you are aware, you are not careless, you are not heedless. Right? So that is in a very mundane context. Right? Isn't it very mundane context? Okay. But in our meditation, we also talk about mindfulness. Later we'll see what this actually word means. Then concentration. So once you're mindful, then the next stage is you're able to focus. Right? So after mindfulness is just being aware. And concentration is when you move to the next stage when you're focused. Right? With a calm and disposed mind. When your mind is very collected, as they say. Right? And you can do that, then you see things in a much clearer perspective, isn't it? Even in our everyday life, right? Imagine you start with self-confidence, you put in the effort. Effort means hard work. Then you're very mindful. You're not careless. You're very careful with what you do, and whatever you do, you're very focused. All right. Then at the end of it, you can see things in a very clear light. You can do an assessment. All right. You can review whatever that has been said. So as we say in the spiritual sense, you have insight. Right? You see things as they really are. Yata Buddha. You see things as they really are. But in the mundane world, you see things, as they really are too. For example, if you're the CEO of a company, then you realize that no matter how dominant you are in that particular business, there's always the possibility that somebody else would be able to overtake you, isn't it? All right, so you have that sense of a healthy sense of crisis. All right, that is because you have that wisdom. Okay, you do not, as they say, become complacent. You do not rest on your laurels. Okay, right? Like like some of you, maybe you have businesses which are very dominant, but you never know. The next day, somebody, may just spring up, and then there goes your business. Right? So you have that wisdom or that knowledge to know the three characteristics. So you don't bring the three characteristics into the corporate life, but actually you see the three characteristics. You see that things are always subject to change, isn't it? Subject to change. And then because things are always subject to change, they are not satisfactory. Because they are not satisfactory, you always have a sense of urgency. But how do you have a sense of urgency? Is it a healthy sense of crisis, or a negative, pessimistic sense of crisis? All right, so goes back again to your self-confidence. If you are very confident, you have got the skill set, you have got the competency, then you don't think that it's a problem. You can overcome it. You have that confidence. So it all starts with confidence. So you can see the 5 faculties, you can even apply it in your everyday life, in a corporate circle, right? Okay, so wisdom. Now, balance. Now, the other part is we want to talk a little bit about it. It's about balance, right? Each one of it. So when you consider individually, the 5 faculties each perform their own unique tasks, isn't it? In their respective domains. But as a group, they accomplish the collective task of establishing inner balance and harmony. So they divide it into 2 pairs, right? Each member counters the undesirable tendency plus enabling to actualize the fullest potential. So let's see what are this balance. So one pair is faith and wisdom, all right? So that is why you find that as I said, Nagarjuna always express this statement, you start with faith and then you end with wisdom. And not only Nagarjuna, as I mentioned just now, you look at the 25 beautiful cetasikas, the Sobanas cetasikas, the 25. The first one is faith, and the last one is actually wisdom. So you must start with faith, and then it eventually culminates in wisdom. So faith and wisdom form one pair to balance devotion and understanding. As I said just now, if you have too much faith, you try to cultivate too much faith, all right, you can become very dogmatic, or you become a blind follower. You just blind faith. It becomes blind faith, all right, and that faith will not be strong. You'll be rootless, all right, like Amulika. Okay, so that's the danger. If you only have faith, you only develop faith without wisdom. But if you try to cultivate only wisdom but without faith, what is the near enemy if you only cultivate wisdom? Do you know? So in the text it says that you develop conceit, pride, conceit. You think, oh, I already know, I already learned from the best teacher. Who else? If he's the best teacher, I'm the best student. So obviously, I can recite, I know what are the 16 insight knowledges. I already know that, I know everything. All right, and when I practice, I can see nimittas, and even the devas are coming to bowing to me, So if you have those kind of image, then you go around telling people, come, I can be your teacher. And then that's where you find that your wisdom get way off. All right, so that's the danger. So you must always balance it. Okay, now what do we balance this with? What do we balance this with? Mindfulness. So mindfulness acts as a balance for faith and wisdom. Okay, in the Mahayana tradition, they got 2 very important teachings. One is compassion, one is emptiness. All right, shunyata and karuna. So in the Mahayana tradition, they always talk about it's very important for us to cultivate compassion, like bodhicitta, the altruistic mind. But at the same time, they say if you don't cultivate enough of compassion, then practice is not good. But if you only practice emptiness, all right, then you become very conceitful. You see everything as empty, right? No compassion. Why compassion? Everything is empty. What is there to be compassion? No living beings, isn't it? Everything is no self. right? So you adopt a very negative, very pessimistic view of things. So you use compassion to balance wisdom. But today we're talking about faith and wisdom, so in a similar vein, very important to balance. So mindfulness acts as a balancing factor. That is why you find that it's in the middle. And then what is the last? Energy and concentration. So form a second pair to balance active exertion and calm recollection. When you have too much energy, right, what will it lead to? Right, in your meditation, right? I mean, all of us do some form of meditation, right? When you exert too much in our meditation practice, when we try to sit and meditate, what arises? What happens? Huh? What happens if you exert too much energy, too much effort? Have you ever tried meditation? You have, right? So, or you're all perfect balance, right? So you don't have that. Well, for most people, if you practice meditation, you put in too much effort. For example, you said, oh, I'm very inspired, so much self-confidence, I want to practice meditation. And they say that Satipatthana Sutta says that, within 7 days I can become enlightened. Wow. So you want to strive for that, all right? So you, from morning, you sit and you put in exert too much. Then what happens is, you don't get enlightened, but you get restless. You get restlessness, isn't it? That's why the 5 hindrances. Remember the 5 hindrances? So when we do meditation, it's very important to understand the 5 hindrances. You know the 5 hindrances? The sensual desires, and then hatred, restlessness, sloth and torpor, and then doubts. So if you don't have enough effort, you say, everybody said, meditate lah. Come and sit, just sit. So slowly people close eyes, you also close eyes, but you are sleeping. So your meditation ends up in what is called sloth and torpor. Sloth and torpor, right? These are remember the 5 hindrances? We all remember that, right? So you see, all these are tools, they are not for us to remember, they are just tools for us to remind ourselves that too much of something is not good now. In everyday life, we talk about everyday life. I don't know what's your favorite food. If you like your favorite food, you eat too much of it the same time. The same bowl, you eat one bowl of noodle, your favorite noodle, whatever that may be. First plate is very nice, right? Try the second plate, not so nice, really. Third plate, you don't want, really, right? So too much of anything is also not good. So, some moderation is important. Yeah. So too much energy is not good. And you find during in the life of the Buddha, you remember the famous story before he became enlightened. He was his last hurdles, so to speak, right? The final dash before he became enlightened. He was sitting meditation, and he couldn't. Then so happened that the story says that then he heard some music from the forest. The first time he heard the music, the sound of the music, he traced it, or it comes from a musical instrument. I think it was a lute, right, or a lute. Then said the first time the sound wasn't very pleasant. And then when he inquired why the sound wasn't pleasant, because the strings of the lute was too loose. All right? So the sound wasn't nice. Then the second time, again he heard the music, but this time the sound also wasn't nice. And when he inquired, he found that the strings of the lute was too tight. It's like you play your guitar, if the strings are too loose, the music is not very melodious, right? When the strings are too tight, also not melodious. And the third time, right, Buddhist teaching only got 3 times, right? So the third time, he found that the music was just nice, just melodious. Why? Because the strings were not too loose, the strings were not too tight, right? So that became the subject of another sutta. I think it's called the Sona Sutta, S-O-N-A. So you can read that the discourse. It talks about the importance of having, finding a good balance, a good medium, right, in our practice. Right? So that's why Buddhist practice, right? If you force yourself and say, before the end of September and another 10 days, I must attain first stage. If you have that kind of that energy, then you find that probably you can't. So you need to relax. Right? The other story, of course, is Ananda, isn't it? Right? The story of Ananda. So you find a lot of such stories in the Buddhist teachings, right? About the importance of energy, very important, but we must always balance it. Concentration, the same thing, right? So energy and so you balance it. When your virya is a bit low, then you build up your concentration, right? When your virya is too strong, then you reduce your concentration. All right? Okay? So mindfulness is the one that acts as a medium that moderates. It is said that you can have too much of faith, you can have too much of trying to cultivate wisdom or to see emptiness, see sunyata, right? Or too much of energy, trying to put your effort into energy, too much of putting into concentration, but it's very difficult. You hardly can have too much of mindfulness. Why? As later we will see. Mindfulness, you must always balance. Okay, so these 5 spiritual faculties, so when you develop them, they become powers. All right? How do they become powers? In other words, your faith already overcomes or controls whatever doubt that you have. All right? And you know that in the Buddhist teachings, the first stage is when you have no more doubts about the Buddha's teachings. Okay? The sotapan, right? Energy will control laziness, right? Mindfulness will control heedlessness. That is why in the final discourse the Buddha gave, the final teaching the Buddha gave, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha said, strive on with heedfulness, strive on with mindfulness, right? And then concentration will control distraction, right? So you see how important it is to have a focused mind in our everyday work, in our office. If you are not focused, you get easily distracted, isn't it? Right? So this is the purpose. And wisdom will, of course, overcome ignorance. Okay, so I'm going to just skip through this very quickly because I think I've already explained this. So objects of faith, from the scriptural point, what is the objects of faith of the 3 refuges? This morning, all of you recited the 3 refuges, the Buddha, his teachings, and these holy disciples. Then the law of cause and effect, as I mentioned. If you summarize the entire Buddhist teaching, the central teaching of the Buddha is about causality. About causality. That is why when Prince Siddhartha became enlightened, one of the things he discovered or he revealed was the law of dependent origination, isn't it? From ignorance to the 12 cycles, right? So that itself is karma, cause and effect. All right, cause leads to effect, effect leads to further cause. All right, so the law of karma, as I said, one thing for us to remember is that every action that we do, whether through body, speech, or mind, have consequences. So we must remember that. Right, and of course, the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, you look at the 5 spiritual faculties. The first one is faith. Faith is not specifically mentioned in the Noble Eightfold Path, right? But with faith, you walk the Eightfold Path. And the next 4 are all in the Noble Eightfold Path. Right? Effort is 4 right efforts. Mindfulness is right mindfulness. Concentration is also samadhi. Right? And then finally you have got wisdom, which is right understanding and right thoughts. So they're all encapsulated in the Eightfold Path. So no matter how you look at the Buddha's teachings, it ultimately goes back to the Eightfold Path. Right? If anybody here, not here, I mean if anybody ever tells you that you can study the Buddha's teachings, so you can practice the Buddha's teachings, no need the Eightfold Path, then that's not really Buddhism anymore. That's not the teachings of the Buddha. All right? And Eightfold Path is not only about meditation, right? Please remember that. All right? Eightfold Path is not only about meditation. Eightfold Path is about, for example, ethics. It's about sila. It's about the importance of our value system. Because without the foundation, which is the value system, it's very difficult for us to even practice whatever meditation that you want to do. Okay? And ultimately, all this must be based on right understanding, right views. That's why it starts with sammaditthi, isn't it? Right views, right at the top. Okay, so always remember that, Eightfold Path, okay? So it culminates in wisdom, which is right understanding and right views. So when you talk about right efforts, we avoid unwholesome actions from body, speech and mind from arising. We abandon unwholesome actions from body, speech that have already arisen. So the first one is, you try to prevent them from arising, all those negative, unwholesome thoughts from arising. The second step is, if it has already arisen, you try to you try to abandon them, all right? They already arisen. And how do you do that? That's a subject for another talk. All right? There's a very important discourse. The Buddha talks about how do we abandon unwholesome actions or thoughts from arising. It's called how to overcome distracting thoughts. All right? If you are impatient for the next speaker to talk on that, you can Google the name of this discourse. It's called the Vitakka Santana Sutta. Some of you may have heard of it, right? Vitakka means thoughts, right? Vitakka Santana Sutta. So that discourse tells you 5 ways how you abandon. So Buddhist teachings is all about tools and techniques and skills, how you actually put it into practice. Okay, and the 5 things mentioned in the Vitakka Santana Sutta, all right, you can also apply it in your everyday life. Well, that's the beauty of the Buddha's teachings. Okay, so you abandon it. Likewise, you develop wholesome actions for body, speech, and mind that have not yet arisen. Okay, what happens if they have already arisen? You try to keep it, try to maintain it. Okay, like for example, why do some traditions they have hours and hours of chanting? Because when they are chanting, they're actually focusing, isn't it? Right? They may be chanting, like, in the Chinese Buddhist tradition, Namo Amitofo, right? So that's chanting the name of Amitabha. Now, is that something in the Theravada we have? We have also, we call the Buddha Nusati. The Buddha Nusati, when you recite the 9 virtues of the, this morning you recited the 9 virtues of the Buddha, right? Isn't it? Itipiso Bhagava Arahang and so on. So you can also use that as an object of meditation. Right? So don't laugh at people the old ladies who chant Amitofo. Because if you do Buddha Nusati, that's actually another version of it. What is the purpose? To build up concentration. While you are doing the Dhamma Nusati, or the Nianfo, isn't it? The Nianfo in the Chinese Mahayana, what thoughts arise in your mind? Only thoughts of Amitabha, thoughts of Pure Land, isn't it? So thoughts of wholesome thoughts. So during that 1 hour, 2 hours, no unwholesome thoughts arise. Maybe immediately after that, then you back to yourself, you start scolding. You start scolding people. Okay? That is when you find that you have not applied what you learn in your sitting in your everyday life. Okay? So it's very important. His Holiness the Dalai Lama always said, meditation is very important, but even more important is post-meditation. That means after you're no longer sitting on the cushion, when you're walking, you're talking to people, do you talk with compassion? Do you talk with loving kindness? Do you talk with sympathetic joy? Or are you always very jealous? Hiya, this neighbor. How can you buy a new car? Must be drug money lah. We always like to, isn't it? Or we become very racist, this one definitely corruption. So we immediately jump to that conclusion. It may not be, isn't it? The guy worked very hard, Okay, so these are the 4 right efforts. We can spend one whole session talking about it, but you know where to find it. This is in the Noble Eightfold Path, okay? Now, I just want to give you one slide here. This is from Thich Nhat Hanh. You know Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh? Very famous Vietnamese Zen master who passed away. He talks about joy in effort. So whatever practice that we do, like we put in our effort in meditation, we must have joy. If your practice does not bring joy, you're not practicing correctly. Right? If each time when you go for a meditation class, you say, terrible, I'm going to sit again, when is it going to end, Right? So there's no joy. But each time when you go, there is joy. There is, then our practice should be like a well-tuned instrument. I think I mentioned that, yeah? If the strings are too loose, they won't play a sound, and so on. So practice should be nourishing, not draining. If after your meditation session you say, very tiring, This is worse than running 3 miles every morning. Then maybe you're overstraining yourself, isn't it? Could be due to restlessness. Or it could be a case where you have not been sleeping well, all right? You have late nights, Then you try to sit in meditation, then concentration is not there. Then you come up very tired, isn't it? So it's very important for us to have to check our state of mind before we embark on that. Yeah. So, but we must have joy. All right. So if you are not happy, all right, if anybody here is is very depressed, because after listening to the Dhamma talk, then you that should not be the case. Huh? Now, the Buddha defines sati as keeping something in mind. That is, continuously remembering the object you're aiming to keep your attention on. Example, mindfulness of breath. You do mindfulness of breath, right? Of the body, remembering the breath and awaiting the awareness of the breath. So mindfulness also being connected with being alert and ardent and clear comprehension. So sati is not just bare attention.